I want to thank the senator from Virginia for his clarion call for the United States Senate to accept its constitutional responsibility when it comes to the prospect of a war with Iran. He has referenced many times the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act, students of history remember, was passed by the United States Congress after the end of the Vietnam War so that Congress would assert with specificity its authority when it came to the execution of a war. The president at the time, Richard Nixon, opposed the War Powers Act and vetoed it. And because of what the United States had endured during the course of the Vietnam War, Congress overrode the veto of President Nixon to make it clear with the War Powers Act that we would never, ever, by design, find ourselves in the same moral predicament we did with the war in Vietnam. Almost 50,000 American lives lost in that war in Vietnam, a war which was not a declared war under the Constitution, but one which still exacted a heavy, incalculable price on American families. Families I know and everyone knows, whose lives were touched by that Vietnam War, whose sons and daughters may have served or may have given their lives in service. The decision was made in Congress, never again. We're not going to let this happen again. We're not going to find ourselves backsliding into a war. The American people, through their elected men and women representing them in Congress, will make the decision as to whether it is time for us to go to war. Will make the decision as to whether our men and women in uniform are going to risk their lives at war. The decision will be made by the American people through their elected representatives in Congress. It was not a novel idea. You find it in this little Constitution, which we're all handed when we take the oath of office. And as Senator Kaine of Virginia has noted, Article 1, Section 8, in just a few words says, the Congress shall have the power to declare war. It's not equivocal. There are no footnotes, asterisks, question marks. The Congress shall have the authority to declare war. And now, at this moment in time, with the assassination of General Soleimani and the escalation of the conflict between the United States and Iran, Senator Kaine and I come to the floor and ask this Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, do these words count? Do we have a constitutional responsibility to stand up and speak up and to challenge this president or any president of either political party when they start moving us toward a moment of war which could easily claim the lives of many Americans? That's the purpose of our resolution. It is simple and straightforward, but it really goes to a fundamental question. The men and women who serve this country in uniform, God bless them for their sacrifice and their courage. We know that when they take the oath to serve, they are prepared to risk their lives in service. Many of us have attended the funerals of service members who gave their lives in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and so many other places. It is a heartbreaking experience to see that emotional family leaving a church or a synagogue after a service honoring someone in uniform who's given their life for this country. That is so fundamental that Senator Kaine and I come to the floor today and say we are finding ourselves now moving day by day closer and closer to a confrontation with Iran that could result in a war. And what Senator Kaine has cataloged and gone through is this long buildup under the Trump administration that brings us to this moment. To think that President Trump inherited from President Obama an international agreement that included as signatories not only our traditional European allies, but also China and Russia, to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. To think that that agreement was being monitored by international overseers who reported back to us that they had ready access throughout the nation of Iran when it came to making certain that that JCPOA agreement was lived up to. To think that that at least gave us the assurance that Iran would not develop a nuclear weapon, and that this president, with a series of tweets and actions, would sweep it away and say, we're going to ignore this treaty. We're going to walk away from it. We're going to confront the Iranians in a variety of ways, as Senator Kaine has spelled out. So we come to the floor this afternoon to really appeal to our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. On behalf of the American people, let us learn the lessons of history, a lesson bitterly learned during the Vietnam War, that if Congress does nothing, a war can develop and continue at great human cost. I know the moments of great decision that are made in the United States Congress, and I've been fortunate to be part of some of them. I remember October the 16th, 2002, as if it were yesterday. I remember that well at that place that I point to, where in the early morning hours, three of us, three senators, stood and spoke to one another as we left to go home. There had just been a vote for an authorization of use of military force in Iraq. The three of us who gathered in the well included Senator Paul Wellstone of Minnesota, Senator Kent Conrad of North Dakota. And we looked at one another, having all three voted against the invasion of Iraq, and realized we were headed home to face the electorate on that decision. It was an emotional moment. And I remember saying to Senator Wellstone, who had voted against the invasion of Iraq as I had, Paul, I hope this doesn't cost you the election. And he said, Dick, if it does, it's all right, because that's what I was elected to do, to come here and to vote on issues. And is it possible there's any issue more important than the issue of asking American families to give their children in service of this country in a war? Senator Wellstone passed away a few days later in an airplane crash. It's my last conversation with him. But I remember that moment, and I remember the responsibility we had. And what Senator Kaine and I are doing now is to appeal to our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Do not walk away from our responsibility when it comes to the future decision of whether we go to war with Iran. Stand up for those American families who sent us here to do our constitutional duty. Engage in the debate as to whether this is the right thing at the right moment of history, or whether it's an impulsive decision by a president who broke away from a political campaign meeting to authorize the assassination of General Soleimani and then returned to the campaign meeting. Make the decision as to whether this is the right moment in history. Don't point to the president that it's his responsibility. It is our responsibility. That is what this Constitution says. And now, with that responsibility, we need to stand up and act. I am honored to join Senator Kaine. We have filed our resolution. We are seeking a ruling by the parliamentarian and want to move forward on a schedule for a debate here on the floor of the Senate. It may be the single most important debate that we face this year or many years to come. Mr. President, I yield the floor.